Cool.
Hi,
Cynthia.
Hi.
It's very nice to finally actually speak to you face to face.
Yes, good to be here. I'm just looking at where I silenced my phone. Sorry, I should have done this before. There we go.
There you are. Good. I know you're a really, really busy lady, so thank you so much for having a chat with me, and hopefully what we talk about will be really useful to a lot of parents out there who are just starting their homeschooling journey or considering doing it.
Yep.
Previous to us starting the recording, we had a quick conversation about how homeschooling has grown exponentially, considering, you know, the past the past few years. 2019, I think you said, from 2019 to now, there's been a 70.9% increase in homeschooling. Well, exemptions being processed, and there's quite a few districts that are way behind, as you said, because of the amount of applications coming in. So it's become a very strong trend. I don't think only in New Zealand. I think the whole homeschooling concept or drive has grown globally, hasn't it?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
And I think the more people do it, the more people talk about it, other people hear about it, and so you know it self-perpetuates in that sense, as well as being for all the reasons, you know, why people are starting homeschooling. It's, you know, people get more confident when more of their friends are doing it, and it becomes more normal. And
So well, that segues quite nicely into my first sort of discussion point. What are the pros and the cons of homeschooling?
obviously go on about the pros for, you know, hours and hours. So I jotted down a few points, and I've tried to balance some pros and cons, because, you know, I think it's a very positive experience, but like everything, you know, there's some things that make it a little bit more difficult for people. So one of the pros is that you get to build really good family relationships, and you get to be there when your kids are achieving things. You know, you get to see the light bulb come on, you get to see them achieve this thing that they were struggling with, you get to hear their excitement and be there for all of those moments, and you get to develop those relationships. You know, it's not just about doing academic work, it's about family values and working together and cooperation and you know, just encouraging one another and all the things that go along with that. So I guess the flip side of that, the con, is that it's a commitment. Homeschooling does take time, energy, and focus, right? You know, sending your kids to school, a lot of parents just go, okay, Johnny's gone to school, they'll take care of that, right? Well, there is no they once you're homeschooling. You actually have to make it happen. Yep, it's me. So a pro is that you get, and I mean, this is also sort of the same thing, but looked at differently. It's a pro that you get to take personal responsibility for your child's education. You get to choose what they're taught and how they're taught it. You get to choose curriculum and resources that support your vision for your children's education. It's not just what someone else is imposing. The con side of that is that you have to pay for those resources yourself. The government doesn't pay for them. But on the pro side, there is a small government allowance for exempt families. It's not intended to cover all the costs. They call it a supervision allowance. It's just a small amount, but there is something that helps. It's $740 odd for the first child and 600 and something for the second, and so on. On the pro side, you can, however, live more cheaply. You can have soup and bread for lunch because everyone's there to eat it. You don't have to try and send it to school. You don't need school transport, school uniforms, school lunches, school stationery, etc. Of course, your kids still need clothes and they'll still need some stationery, but you can pick what works for you. You can do it more cheaply and so on. Another pro, you have time. You've got time to talk with your kids, to explore things of interest with them, to go for walks, to really dig into where they're at emotionally and whatever's going on, to really invest in them emotionally, mentally, spiritually, as well as academically. And that can be hard to do when your kids are away at school every day and they come home tired
Absolutely.
and cranky and,
Yeah.
trying to get dinner on and
You're
everything.
meeting needs. You can meet
Yeah.
their needs
Absolutely.
in
You
a
can-
way that no teacher could in a classroom full of students
Yeah.
with
And-
needs. Yeah.
And no matter how good the teacher is, they don't love and care about your child the way you do,
No.
right?
And they
So-
don't know them as well
They
as
don't
you
know
do.
them, exactly, precisely. So you're going to have that motivation and that time to zero in on what's going on with the child, and to, see what they need and to work towards those things. The con side, you have less time for yourself maybe, but this is a season of life when the kids are young and it's so short. It'll be over before you even know it. So yes, you need to find ways to get little breaks and to look after your own well-being, but I personally think investing your time into your kids while they're young is totally worth it. Yeah,
I
so
agree.
those are the main ones that
The
come to mind.
main I think what stands out to me is the authenticity around home educating. The authenticity around the relationships that are developed. You're never going to have a more authentic relationship than with your family members, are you?
No.
There's always the argument but the social development is and I look, I'm a teacher, I'm from the system, but I've always wished that I could have had the circumstances to home educate my children, and I would have, if I would have jumped at the opportunity if I'd
I
had it.
begged my mother to homeschool me, but she was a teacher. She refused.
I think a lot of teachers think it's that mother child relationship, that you're going to get the resistance that they wouldn't give another teacher and all those sort of things that go on in your mind. But for me, the biggest pro of home educating is that authenticity of learning, and it's totally child-centered. It's got absolutely nothing to do, well, not absolutely nothing to do, but very little to do with the curriculum. The child is the center and the curriculum fits around the child. It's not the other way around.
Well, there's a saying we used to use in homeschooling circles a lot: teach the child, not the curriculum. And
yes.
It's saying exactly that. The child is the one you're teaching. The curriculum is the resource you use to support as it fits.
As it fits.
If you need to modify something, you modify the curriculum.
That's exactly how it is. And the social side of things, and actually that's where I started off, was you have way more authentic social opportunities when you're homeschooling, because it's not like you stay at home all day and that's it. I mean, the social aspect of homeschooling or home educating, I prefer the word home educating because homeschooling sounds too institutionalized to me, but yeah, I mean, it's not only a wonderful way to get your children to socialize, but actually for yourself as well, because you build a community around yourself of like-minded people, and it's much more supportive and collaborative and authentic in the way things happen, for those kids socially.
I agree.
That was my understanding around it anyway. I mean, they're not herded into a room with all the same age group and made to get on with each other,
That's a very artificial construct. People say, how will they survive in real life if they haven't been in a classroom? And I'm like, well, we're in real life. Are they with 30 kids their own age or 30 people their own age? We don't do that in the adult world. We don't do it outside of school. I mean,
yeah, exactly.
Kids need to get on with everybody. And I mean, one of the first things when I was considering homeschooling, one of the first things I ever went to was it was in the Nelson region. They had an annual event that they called Pets Day, and it was kind of like a mini A&P show for homeschoolers. So they had calves and lambs, and they had crafts that the kids had done, and sewing things and different things that the kids entered into. So everyone would bring along their things for judging, and they'd all get laid out in the tents, and then the kids would all go off and play while the adults were doing the judging and so on. and I came along there with probably had 4 kids at the time, I think. And I came along and I sat, and we would have picnic lunch and stuff, and I watched these kids, and they were from like little tiny ones through to older teenagers. And there was a couple of teenage boys on the lawn playing swing ball, they're bashing the ball around the pole, and they were going for it. Like, they were just hard out swinging at this ball. And a little kid of about 2 came running across the lawn towards them and immediately stopped the ball, made sure the child was protected. Another kid of about 8 swooped in and picked up the toddler and took them off to play somewhere else. And the boys went back to their game. And the whole day, there was incidences like this where the kids were looking after each other. There was cooperation, encouragement. Everyone, even if a kid missed out on winning a prize, they were cheering wholeheartedly for the ones that won. There was recognition and encouragement and all this social interaction. Never saw fighting or nastiness or anything. And I thought, this is what I want for my kids. This is genuine, authentic, caring social interaction across a wide range of stratas of ages and what have you, adults, older people, grandparents, you name it, all there.
Absolutely.
And that was, one of my first experiences of a homeschooling social situation. And it's exactly what I've seen over the years. Yeah.
And so that argument to me is absolutely null and void. Because I even though I've been in the institution of school, my whole philosophy has always been about natural learning and developing an environment for kids to feel like they're at home, really, and develop those connections. So yes, and which come completely naturally when you're at home learning, with everybody else. Looking at you can't just, well, I guess you can just decide that you want to homeschool and pull your kids out, but you will most likely have repercussions from the system. So how do people actually go about getting an exemption, Cynthia?
Okay. So just briefly, the law says that kids between 6 and 15 have to be enrolled in attending school unless they're exempt. So the point of the exemption is to exempt them from that requirement so that you can go ahead and teach them at home. So I think the other thing that parents sometimes don't understand is that the law says that the parents have the right to decide how and where their child will be educated. So that's why you can pick which school they can go to within enrollment situations, or you can choose to teach them at home. That is your legal right. So you don't have to explain why you're choosing that or your reasons and that kind of thing. It's just your right. However, the child also has a right to an education. So the exemption process and the requirement to satisfy the ministry that they'll be taught at least as regularly and as well, it's simply there to protect the child's right to an education, to ensure you do have a plan, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so to the exemption process, the ministry has a webpage for home education, and you can download their application forms from there. It's worth reading through the page. It has some useful information on there. The application forms are a form fillable PDF, but it's not very user friendly and it doesn't always save data. So I'd say to most people, just use the first section, which is your name, date of birth, kid's address, all that stuff. 3 pages, use that part, but do the rest in a Word document or some other thing that you can make sure it saves. If you do it in their form, I'd copy and paste it into something else as well. So if that all crashes, you haven't lost
you've got
that
something
work you've done. It's happened far too often. So I think the first step, though, before you try and fill out the form, the first step is to read, watch, listen and talk. Read books, blogs, watch videos, talk to other home educators about their experiences and so on. Find out what sounds good to you, what ideas, approaches, etc. resonate with your vision for your family. And then brainstorm. Write down what you want education to look like in your family, what resources you've already got in your home. They don't have to be curriculum. Do you have a sewing machine? Do you have craft supplies? Do you have woodworking equipment. Do you have a kitchen? Do you, what have you got? And what's in your wider community? Are there museums? Are there parks? Are there zoos? Are there beaches and rivers and so on? And then think about, what are you excited to explore and to learn about together? Are there things your kids are interested in, or local resources you want to explore? What talents do you as parents have, or what are in your wider family and circle of friends that are willing to share? So if Granny's really good at sewing, maybe she can teach the kids how to sew. If your best friend happens to be a potter, maybe they're willing to show the kids how to do pottery. Just gather these ideas of what's around, what you could draw on, what you're good at, what you're interested in. Then and so, get really excited about these things, because this is the fun, authentic part of planning home education. Then once you've sort of got that vision going, then make sure you understand the requirements of the exemption application. So read the ministry's website, have a look at their form. I've got a guide to exemptions, which I'll discuss when we get to the resources a bit more, but I've got a guide to exemptions. There's information on the NCHEN's National Council of Home Educators website. Gather all that information, understand what are they looking for in this application, and then just start writing. Work your way through the application, one section at a time, not necessarily in the order it's in. Start with the bits you think are easy, right? Until you've kind of put together a bunch of information and you think you've covered everything needed, and then maybe get someone to look it over, make sure you've got everything there. If you want to, that's optional, before you submit it to the ministry. It's really all there is to it, though it is a bit of a, it's a mountain to climb.
I think a lot of parents have a look at that exemption form and balk, oh my gosh.
Certainly do.
But it's not as intimidating as, well, I guess it would be intimidating if you actually haven't done all that pre-work that you talked about, getting excited about looking at what's around you and what resources are at hand and what you feel is relevant for an education. I know I've had a couple of inquiries from parents of very young children, preschool children who are now old enough to go to school, but they don't want them to go to school, but around teaching literacy and numeracy, they often feel that they don't have the expertise, I guess. What advice would you give those parents?
First of all, don't rush. You don't have to nail it all down, and Johnny doesn't have to be reading novels by the time he's 7. At the same time,
he might be, but
I was, but I mean, not every child's like that. One of my kids did, the other 4, it was a much slower process. At the same time, do the natural stuff, right? A lot of parents don't realize they're already teaching their kids when they play I Spy, when they point out words in a book they're reading together, when they talk about when they just use language, when they converse about stuff, when they count rocks and pegs and Smarties and divvy up the pizza evenly and that kind of stuff. They're doing math and literacy, right? Those are pre-skills. Those are important. Knowing that you hold the book up this way and it goes left to right on the page, and those are all pre-reading skills and basic stuff.
Reading with
reading
and
right, exactly. Using rhyme and listening to stories and using different voices and encouraging them to share their ideas. Singing, absolutely. So a lot of the stuff is natural. That's the beginning. But yes, I get that a lot of parents, and myself included, find it really useful to have a good resource that guides them through, particularly teaching phonics. Most people, early math is fairly straightforward, counting, skip counting and adding and subtracting and so on. But literacy, we often want a resource. So there are lots of really great reading programs out there. You can dig into them. I've got a manual on planning your program that outlines a bunch of resources. You can look on the internet, you can look on the NCHEN's website, and you can find a program that will guide you step by step through teaching a child to read. Some of them use a lot of flashcards and musical devices and exercises and tell the parent what to do. Some of them are literally pick up, sit down with your child and work through it together, and it's all just kind of laid out and it moves step by step. It's not as hard as it sounds. I think that's probably one of the most daunting things when you start out. Oh my gosh, how am I going to teach this child to read? It's so complicated. You taught them to talk, didn't you? And to walk and to go to the toilet and to wash their hands and all these things. You can teach them to read.
Yes, you can. I mean, it isn't an a natural it isn't actually a natural process, because it's such a recent process that we haven't really evolved into just picking it up naturally like we have language, you know. But it's not that difficult, really.
It's knowing what to introduce and repeating it often enough and taking the time to help the child absorb these things and build on the skills one step at a time.
And that's the beauty of it. You have the time.
Exactly.
And you can't really muck it up. It's not like if you do, you know, if you do this and it doesn't work, that's the end. You've broken your child. It's not like that at all.
I had a certain teacher who shall remain nameless try and tell me that was indeed exactly how it happened.
Oh, really? Okay.
Haven't you told that child to read yet? If they're not reading by the time they're 6, they'll never catch up. You've ruined life. My eldest was 9 before he was reading fluently, and it was just like he learnt phonics, he learnt blending, he was totally fine, but he would just sound everything out. He couldn't get the idea of reading fluently until suddenly, just before he turned 9, light bulb came on. Away he went, never stopped reading after that. I was always telling him to put the book down and do something.
Yes, I mean, we all have, you know, I'm actually dyslexic, biologically dyslexic. And I never got phonics either.
My second child is severely dyslexic, still doesn't get phonics. No idea, it makes no sense.
But when you're learning to read in a natural environment, you use your right brain for a left brain function. That's basically what dyslexia is about. But you learn to either learn to build, you know, the neuroplasticity side of things, where you build new neurons going to the left hand side of your hemisphere, or you actually learn to read using your right hands, your right hand hemisphere. And those people that actually learn to read naturally like that, who are dyslexic, who all of a sudden just pick up, oops, there's reading, they're reading all of a sudden, you know, because they've built up a vocabulary, because essentially they're thinking in pictures. But those people are the ones who are really fluent readers, and some even grow to be even more fluent than a typical reader, you know. So you can't really break your child.
I think that, and it's the same with anything you're doing when you're teaching, when you're homeschooling. You try a way of doing something, and if it clearly isn't working, you just try another way.
Exactly.
Right? You find a new resource, a new idea, a new way of presenting it. Or you just, sometimes it's time, sometimes the child's just not ready, and you back off for a while, and then you come back at it in another 6 months or something, and suddenly they're ready, right?
Yeah.
So
and you have the luxury of doing that.
Exactly. I think that's one of the greatest things with homeschooling, because the kids aren't all being progressed through classes in a group. They don't have to keep up with some standardized level. They can go at their pace, you know. And if they need an extra year or 2 to finish high school at home, so what?
So what?
You know, and exactly. But a lot of kids will, if the ones that start off a bit slower, they'll catch up or accelerate past their peer level at some point down the track. Some won't. It doesn't matter. You know, my kids are all grown. They're all functional adults with jobs and degrees and whatever businesses and whatever they needed. You know, they all got there.
Probably in a less stressed, less artificial way than you know, any typical child or young adult would anyway. So okay, so we might as well go on to the next thing. We've kind of touched on it anyway. It says, what supports are on offer and how do you get hold of them? So not only for exemptions, but I would say for homeschooling as a whole. Rather, yes. So
the National Council of Home Educators is the only national body representing homeschoolers. They have a website, Nchens, that's nChenz.org.nz. So a lot of information on there about all sorts of things, and also you can join if it's free to join, and then they offer discounted access to various resources, so things like Reading Eggs and Math Seeds and Math Whiz and I don't know, Beast Academy and a whole bunch of things you can get a discounted access to by being a member of Nchens. So that's a very useful resource. My own website, cynthiahancox.com, lots of information there around the legalities, around exemptions, around a whole bunch of things affecting homeschoolers as you go along the journey. Also, there's some, in terms of exemptions, there's a few other experienced home educators providing exemption support, which I can direct people to if they get in touch with me through my website. You asked about libraries for resources and that kind of thing. Some regional support groups have their own homeschoolers libraries. Manawatu Home Educators, for instance, they have a resource library which members can borrow from, but I'm not sure what other ones do. I think there's a few around the country, but not the norm. However, most public libraries have graded readers and books and te reo and other resources, and of course the library's a great resource for lots of different things. There's many curriculum options out there, so lots of publishers' websites with curriculum. They range in price from free to expensive, downloadable, physical, you name it. There's just so many. It's why I wrote this manual, Planning Your Home Education Program, comes up backwards. But this just goes through just some of the curriculum choices and where to find them and how they work and so on and so forth.
And that can be found on your website? Yeah,
on my website. And this is my guide to exemptions. So that walks you through the exemption process and step by step, section by section. But there's just like, you know, people say to me, oh, what's the best curriculum?
It's a piece of string.
Let's narrow that down. How old is your child? What language do you want it in? Do you want secular or faith-based? Do you want this? Do you want that? You know, okay, now let's narrow it down. So there's New Zealand curriculum-based ones. There's, you know, American ones, little ones. There's ACE, they're American. So ACE, ABECA, Sunlight, Apologia, The Good and the Beautiful, Sex and Math, Matthew C, Start Right Math, New Zealand curriculum workbooks. Education Perfect, IXL, Study Ladder, Reading Eggs, Math Seeds, Math Quiz, you know, like I could go on and on, right? So this is where going to websites like mine on Nchens will list a bunch of different options, and you can then look further at what you want. You can, once you've got an exemption, you can access down the back of the chair the ministry's resourcing division. You're entitled to one free copy of most of the resources. They do prioritise the schools. So once you've got an exemption, you can contact them and get a login details, and then you can order things from them. You don't always get what you ask for, but you may be able to get some things.
And they are free.
And they're free. So yeah, and some museums have education departments where you can borrow resource kits. So Te Manawa and the Manawatu, we borrowed a skeleton resource kit when we were studying the human body, which had all sorts of things in it. So it's got different kits from different places. So there's a lot of different things out there. Sometimes it's just a matter of talking to others who are local to you and saying, hey, what's around? What can we access? And then, of course, using the internet to find out about other things.
Yes, I know that in the Bay of Plenty, particularly Rotorua, Te Wainanga have launched a science-based resource pack where you can actually just order in the resource pack and then take it back to them, you know, send it back to them once you've finished with it. So it's about, I guess it's about getting into the community and finding out around, like you said, there's resources everywhere you go, really.
There is. And I mean, a lot of departments, DOC, for instance, you know, they have downloadable education resources on their websites. You know, if you want to learn about the Kiwi, you can go onto the Kiwi Conservation website.
That's right.
You know, you can download all these different things that teachers use when they take their kids for school trips, but you can use them too to teach your kids.
And also it's really recommended, I guess, to actually get in touch with your local homeschooling community. Absolutely. Because you know, and I know that, you know, as a group you can organize trips to you know, to wherever you want to go. The museum.
Most regions have organised groups, some more than others, depending on how many people there are locally. It's all parent driven. So if you've got a bunch of motivated parents, there's going to be lots of good stuff going on. If you haven't, then you might need to step up and organise something yourself. But on the Ninten's website, there is a tab for support, and you can drop it down. And there's a link with regional groups and physical groups. And online groups and regional groups, and you can get in touch with people and find out what's going on in your area. And I mean, a lot of them have just amazing stuff, like multiple times a week you could go to activities, and they have big annual events like balls and camps and AMP type shows and so on and so forth. I mean, when we used to live in quite remote areas, and when we first moved to an area that was within a region where there was big organised groups and started going to lots of activities, it only took a few weeks before my kids were like, "Mum, can we stay home more?" We're like, "We're doing everything." I'm like, okay, we need to find a balance. Okay, so maybe art and history classes and swimming and this and that was a bit too much,
Yeah, well, that's actually that's the whole idea around the ARC education. Actually, is to be able to have a hub where people can actually go to and say, "Oh, there's a swimming class in my area, and I'll go there," sort of thing. And as it develops and grows, hopefully it'll become a really good resource for that too. So. Yes, there's support everywhere you look, really. If that's what you want to do, if you really want to homeschool or home educate. So I am a big advocate for it. I really feel, even though I'm a school teacher so for 30 years, I really feel that it's the future of education, actually. And maybe not everybody homeschooling their kids, but if we could make our schools or our education system look more like a homeschooling situation, I reckon we would have a lot less problems that have manifested over the years for us.
If we would just stop repeating things that were proven not to work decades ago, then that would be a good start.
And also about working with kids, making them the center of, and the rhetoric's always there, the children are the center of but they're not.
It's impossible in the current model of education.
Absolutely.
It's
absolutely.
Yeah.
It's impossible. It can't be like that. But hey, maybe I think things are changing, or are going to have to change, because I mean, just the fact that all these families have made the commitment to home educate, and those are the families that we know of who have actually gone for an exemption. I mean, there's a lot of people who are unschooling who haven't bothered.
There is.
I don't know what the consequences will be, but so yeah, it is.
Education is definitely changing. I mean,
it has to.
Well, there's the ones who've gone for the exemption route, as you rightly point out. There's some who have not, or at least at this time have not. But there's also, the new rise of distance learning schools, private online schools, and that kind of thing. So there's
Crimson Academy, and
there's quite a few now. So Crimson's been around a bit longer, and it's kind of elite academic high school, right? And not it's for a portion of the population, but it's not for everybody. But there's Amana Christian School doing distance. There's Mount Hobson Academy connected. There's AGE. There's 3H International. They're all offering distance learning where the kids are learning at home. 3H, they do part online, part offline, and they come together for certain activities. So there's lots of different models out that have become possible. The Education and Training Act 2020, which was a massive document that I spent all of Christmas reading away 100 pages when it first came out, But it did.
Did that benefit you in any way?
Oh, well, there was some things that needed addressing, okay. And I was actually quite proud of the home education community because, you know, like all these things, they tried to rush it through one Christmas. And I was going to have Christmas off, but it turned out I wasn't. All the submissions that were put forward about the education and training Act, 50% of them were from home educating families, which I thought was marvellous, right? I pointed out some serious issues that were there, and they really came to the party, which is good because you've got such a diverse group of people. They're not always moving in the same direction at once.
No.
Very rarely are they moving in the same direction at once. But anyway, what I was trying to say was that act did usher in the opportunity for some new models of school, because up until that act came in, the only distance learning school recognised by law was Te Kura.
Te Kura, yeah,
right?
yes.
But by changing the definition and changing what could be an approved distance school under the law, it opened up the option for all of these other ones to come along. And then, of course, COVID put the boot in the behind because all these kids were needing a different learning model. And I mean, yes, most of them, well, all of them apart from Te Kura are private schools, and therefore there are fees. Though those fees vary enormously.
There's even fees with Te Kura as well. So
not if your child qualifies for free entry. There's fees if you get an exemption and then want to use them. But if your child qualifies for free, then the state funded. So it does.
And it's free from 16 onwards anyway.
It's free from 16 onwards, yes. So it's a bit of a different model, of course, than these new ones. But it does mean that these things are attracting different people, and I guess when numbers move out of the state system, it does make the state system sit up and take notice a bit more and say, okay,
what's happening? Yes, absolutely, because it's all about bums on seats.
It is, because that's numbers and that's funding, and funding is the almighty dollar is the big motivator at the end of the day.
Unfortunately, I mean, we could talk about that till next week.
I mean, you know, realistically, they have to have the funds to hire the teachers to run the programs. I mean, you know, it's absolutely simple math. But I mean,
but they have the funds anyway. This is what gets to me. They have the funds.
It's how they distribute.
It's how they distribute it. Considering that 2/3 of the education budget actually goes to administration costs. 2/3. So only 1/3 goes to schools and to the actual chalk face. So it makes
it needs a bit of rearranging.
I would say so, yeah.
I mean, they started the home education supervision allowance in 1990, and it hasn't changed 1 cent in 32 years. I mean,
really,
the logic they used for how they came up with the figure in the first place is not even logical. It needs a complete rethink. They also, at the time that they recommended that they do this thing, they were also recommended that they'd give homeschooling parents free access to Te Kura. So it would have been a very different picture if families could freely use Te Kura if they wanted to, not have to, but could. So they actually had access to free education resources. But they got no access to that, and a pittance that doesn't go very far in helping them resource them. So it's like, people, you need to rethink this.
I guess it was they don't want people to homeschool, basically.
Yes and no. It's interesting when you actually get talking to senior staff and senior ministers and so on. They recognise that the school system simply cannot meet the needs of some students.
Oh, so absolutely.
The existence of homeschooling gives us
the whole socio-political aspect of it. A school is basically a socio-political machine, and like I said before, you know, bums on seats, and also if you have a populace who is basically thinking for themselves and doing things for themselves, it's not as easy to create compliance, I guess.
to direct their thinking. Yeah,
to direct their thinking and
Yeah.
their movements. And also it's an economic thing in their minds, because people who homeschool, adults who homeschooling aren't working and aren't paying their taxes. So it's a bit of a
Yes, but more of the kids who were homeschooled will be working adults who pay their taxes, instead of ones who get left behind in the school system end up on a benefit when they're adults.
Exactly, but that's not
Yeah, it's all short-term thinking, no long-term thinking.
Yeah. That's
well, in my homeschool, 5 out of 5 of the kids graduated and have jobs and are not a burden on the taxpayer. So I think my success rate's pretty good.
Absolutely. And you speak to any other homeschooling mum, my good friend Nikki's and she's homeschooled 5 kids too, and they're all doing exceptionally well. You've got Antoinette James. I don't know if you have heard of Antoinette, but she I think she's had 6 kids or maybe even 7 go through homeschool, and all of them are highly successful.
I think there is no official exit stats on homeschoolers, right? Because there's no way for us to collect them. But anecdotally, it's pretty apparent that our success rate compared to the state system success rate, it's not going to be 100%. Obviously, we've got so many diverse families, and you've got kids with diverse special needs, and probably a higher percentage of extreme special needs than in the school system, because they pull them out because the school system can't support them.
Cope with them.
But even with that, in general, I think the outcomes are so much better, and the investment of one parent being at home, or sometimes parents share the role, but a parent being available to put that time into the kids, it's so worth that sacrifice, because at the end, government should support it, because at the end of the day, it saves the money, but still short-sighted.
It saves the money down the line. Absolutely. I completely agree.
They keep talking about breaking the cycle. I mean, this is one way to do it, isn't it?
Absolutely. Well, maybe one day somebody will listen.
They've got to ask the right questions of the right people. I found the recent news articles quite fascinating, where the interviewers were all busy running around interviewing people who know absolutely nothing about homeschooling, as if they're the authorities on homeschooling. It's like, you're not going to get correct answers from school principals and stuff, because they actually don't know.
Well, that's the whole thing. The whole thing, and that's why I'm really grateful to be able to talk to you and put it out there in an authentic way, so that people can listen and see and hear and discuss, start the conversation, because in the end, it's actually just going to take our people power to actually change stuff. If
Going to come from the government.
It's not. No, it's never going to come from the government. Well, this iteration of the government, anyway.
Anything a government does change takes a very long time too. Even if they're all for something and they agree to tomorrow, this is what we're going to do, it takes years to play out. Of course it does. Become a thing. So if people want to see change, they need to take that power for their own families and their own lives into their own hands, and do the right thing for their family and make it happen, not sit around. And I think this is an area where sometimes Kiwis struggle a little bit, because this is certainly a generalization and not true of everyone, but as a people in general, we're often quite passive. We wait for someone else to tell us what to do. We wait for someone else to make something happen. We might complain when we're not happy, but we don't actually change anything, right? And that just does not work. If you want to homeschool, you cannot be passive and wait for someone else to tell you what to do and put the books in your hands. You've got to get up off your cushion, do some research, gather some resources, and dig in and do it. And is it scary? Sure. When you're starting out, it can be. Will you make mistakes? Absolutely. But you'll figure it out, and it's worth it. I say to the ministry all the time, parents learn to home educate by home educating. There's no 3-year degree before you start. So when you start, you don't know much, but you just need to figure out a little bit and get started, and you'll figure out the rest as you go along.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And to be honest, that goes for teachers. Let me tell you what, that 3-year degree, is
Doesn't
worth
teach you much.
very little.
Teaches you the lingo maybe, but not necessarily.
Until you actually get in there and really experience, and they make mistakes too, and
We all
it's obviously we're all human, and mistakes aren't a negative thing either. They're opportunities to learn, and yes, what I love about home educating, some really good teachers in schools. I'm not saying that all teachers are terrible at all,
No.
but it's that growth mindset is so important, whereas the ministry and everything else, like you said, is so slow moving because of that fixed mindset that everything's come out from. Yes, if you read my latest blog, it's about that, about the fixed mindset of education, not just here but globally, and how things are going to have to change.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Cynthia, for your time. I really appreciate it. And it's been lovely to talk to you.
Yeah, I appreciate the opportunity.
And good luck with everything that you have been doing. So
thank you, and you too.
thanks.